Let's open with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, thank you again for the day that you've given to us. We thank you for your wonderful love for us. Thank you, Father, for the crowd you've assembled this morning to hear your word. Pray that, Father, as we look into these great books, that, Lord, you will just give insight and understanding to their meaning and deepen our awareness of the Scriptures. And, Lord, the great message in the book of Habakkuk. We pray, God, that as we had an introduction last week, that you'll just bring all of this knowledge together in our minds, that we might have, just again, a thorough understanding of what you want to say to us here today. And, Lord, we pray that your word would be made real in our lives through the Holy Spirit, that he would illumine the truth to us, that we might understand it and apply this great message to our lives. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we are looking at the book of Habakkuk. Pastor Jace was on duty last week to give you a general understanding of what the book is about. I'm going to go over a little bit of review things with you here to remind you that we understand that Habakkuk is not a traditional prophet in the sense that we see most of the 12. The book is very different from the other prophetic books. It does not contain statements like "Thus saith the Lord," or the impending messages of doom and all of this amazing bombastic sort of language that we see in the other prophets. Habakkuk is a different kind of prophet, and the literary style is different, and he's very much unique among the 12, and so it's great to be able to study this great book. Remember the historical background behind the book. What time frame are we dealing with here? Well, there are two possibilities, and the commentators are basically split on when Habakkuk's ministry was. But we know that it was either one of two times. It was either during the reign of Manasseh. Remember, Manasseh was the wicked king who sacrificed his own children in the fire. That wicked king that did so much evil in the eyes of the Lord, more than any of the kings before him. Remember that? So we said we didn't want that written about your life after you were dead. So it was either during the reign of Manasseh or after the reign of Josiah. Because remember that there was Manasseh, then there was Ammon, and then there was Josiah who brought the spiritual reforms. But they didn't last very long. Josiah dies early. At the hand of Pharaoh Necho, shot with arrows. And then after him, we have other kings that come along that are not, they're not good kings, and that further, descend into Israel's idolatry and disobedience, and then we end up in the Babylonian captivity, which happened in how many waves? Three waves. Remember, it was Daniel and his friends taken first, and then after that, there was a return, and more folks were taken, and some of the major prophets were taken in captivity. And then finally, the third time when the city is destroyed, when Jerusalem is destroyed. So remember that the Babylonian captivity takes place in three waves. It didn't happen all at one time. And so Habakkuk's ministry is either during the time of Manasseh or it's after Josiah, during the reign of people like Jehoiakim, and others. But there was definitely some spiritual problems in the nation, and so there's a debate over the scholars over to which place it happens. But the main thing I want you to understand right here is that it took place prior to the Babylonian captivity. Okay, it took place prior to the Babylonian captivity. Right, so that's in that way he's the same as the prophet Zephaniah. Right. So, the style, of this minor prophet is that of a lament. Now, there's an entire book of your Bible dedicated to this type of literary style. What book is it? Lamentations. What's a lamentation? Lamentation is a cry out of sorrow, a cry of grief, a cry of anguish, and a cry of pain, a cry of question. That's a lamentation. God, what are you doing? God, why? God, this is a cry from the heart. That's what a lamentation is. And in a very real way, that's the literary style of the prophet Habakkuk. Habakkuk draws heavily on the Psalms. You see a lot of the language in Habakkuk being mirrored in the Psalms. Many of the Psalms are what we would call lament Psalms, where the author is crying out, "How long, O Lord, will you allow this to happen? Lord, why are you allowing this to take place? Why have my enemies gained the upper hand over me?" You see people lamenting that. "Why am I so downcast, O my soul?" You see these lament Psalms. Some of the most beloved Psalms. That's why the Psalms is such a practical book, because many people feel that way. Over issues or difficult things in their life. When The political situation in their country, turns south on them when they go through a time of personal tragedy, personal trial. Those lament psalms are very personal and very real. That's why they've been such a comfort to so many people over the years. And so that's the literary style of the book of Habakkuk. It's in the form, of a lament, cry out to God, strong emotion, being seen, in this prophetic book. And we'll take a look at that today. The key verse, chapter 2 and verse 4, let's take a look at that. It says this, "See, he is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his..." Okay, but the righteous will live by faith. Now this verse is quoted in the New Testament multiple times. Most importantly by the Apostle Paul. It was this verse here that set Martin Luther into motion in the Protestant Reformation. It was the righteous will live not by his works, but the righteous will live by his faith. Now, I think probably a really good translation of this is the righteous will live by his faithfulness. Okay? And I think that's the sense in which Habakkuk uses it here in the Old Testament. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so remember that the book, is in lament style. It takes the form of a question and answer dialogue between Habakkuk the prophet and God. Okay? And miraculously, God answers the prophet. Something you don't see in the Psalms. You see the psalmist crying out, but you see no answer from God. But here, we have a prophet crying out to God, asking God difficult questions, and God showing up and answering those difficult questions. And that right there is the key value of the book. That we have answers provided for us in the Scriptures about why God does things that we can't understand, that we think may be unfair or unjust. And we have those reasons, given to us here, in the Scriptures, in this dialogue between this prophet, and God Himself. So that's sort of, a little bit of your review. And so let's take a look at the text then, in chapter 1. We read these words, the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. Now that's all the information we get about Habakkuk himself. Remember, like in other books, we had a lineage maybe of a prophet, or we had information about them, where they were born, their hometown, some kind of biographical information. But here, we don't have anything spoken to us about the prophet himself. In fact, the only thing that commentators suggest is true about Habakkuk is that he may have been a musician, that he might have served in some kind of worship function, in or around the temple. Now, why do we say that? We say that for two reasons. First of all, because he draws heavily on the language of the Psalms, and we will point that out as we go through the book. You'll see many of the same words, phrases repeated that you see in some of the classic, well-known lament Psalms. And also, turn to chapter 3. The entire third chapter, you will notice, has what we call a superinscription, just like many of the Psalms do. You know how when you read a Psalm and there's that text above it that's not even given a verse number that should be because it's part of the original Hebrew text? And the superinscription will say a Psalm of David on the occasion of his fleeing from Absalom or whatever it would be, right? It gives you some type of historical data. And sometimes those superinscriptions contain musical notations. And so we have that here in chapter 3. And so the entire third chapter was probably a song, interestingly enough, written by the prophet Habakkuk. And so you read there a prayer of Habakkuk, prophet, on Shigionoth. Now, we don't really even know what that word means, but most folks will believe, most folks believe that it's some kind of musical notation. We don't know what. It's lost to history. Not sure. Nobody really knows. Look at the end of chapter 3, and you'll see more musical notations. The very last phrase, for the director of music on my what? On my stringed instruments. And so you can see here, how it was to be played. Remember that they played a sort of guitar-like looking like thing. So all those of you that were taught when you were raised that guitars were evil, obviously those people didn't clearly read their Bible, because these are stringed instruments, sort of like a, like an ancient guitar. Some were like a lyre or a harp, like instrument. And so these were some of the things that you see here, musical notation in chapter 3. And so this entire third chapter is sort of like a psalm itself. So that's one of the things that folks believe about Habakkuk, that he was somehow involved in maybe some kind of worship function, maybe a writer of music, a composer of music, maybe he was a musician himself because of his knowledge of the Psalms that he clearly brings into his ministry as a prophet. because of the intense emotion that we see from him, in the book, and also because of chapter 3, the musical notations that you see there. So folks typically believe that maybe that was part of what his ministry was. And so the book begins this way, the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. Now these words are interesting. How many people in your version of the Bible have the word oracle? Okay, some of you are going to have the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. Now the word oracle here, or the word for prophecy here, basically means, literally translated, it means burden. Okay, a burden. The burden that the prophet Habakkuk received. Right? Now, these words that we see contained in this small prophet, again, only 3 chapters, not a whole lot of text here. These words are a heavy burden, he says, that he had received, or literally, that he saw. Okay? That's what it says, that he saw. So in other words, the historical events surrounding what was taking place in Habakkuk's day were a heavy burden to him. Now, let me bring this over into the modern context, right? We're experiencing the same thing. When we look at the condition of our nation, when we look at what's going on in our country, when we see the wicked getting what the righteous should get, and the righteous getting what the wicked should get, when we see the wicked seemingly getting away with their wickedness and that only increasing, when we see justice being perverted and lies being the name of the game today, and when we take a look at the conditions under which we're living, and by the way, our conditions are not that bad, but we see where this train is going. We're burdened, aren't we? We feel a heavy burden. And that's exactly how this book starts. This burden that Habakkuk the prophet saw as he observes the spiritual conditions of his people, as he sees what they're doing to one another. And he's wondering, God, why are you allowing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you not stepping in and intervening? Why don't you do something? Are you asleep? We see, this book is so relevant, so incredibly practical for our own situation today. And that's the way it starts. No biographical information, no big lengthy introduction to the prophet himself, just the burden that he had received. And we feel that same burden today, and the righteous of every generation have felt that burden. The words of this book have been a heavy subject for the righteous in every generation. God, why are you allowing to happen what's happening right now? Why are the Germans invading our country? Why, are the Germans getting away with this? Why are the Russians able to persecute their people? Why is this cultural revolution happening in China? Why? You think about all the world history and how the righteous have cried out, how the righteous have had this heavy burden placed upon them. God, why do you allow the evil that we see taking place in our situation, right? Remember also that Habakkuk is not this distant third-party observer to what's happening. He's not detached, but both he and Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, and Isaiah, all of these people, they have what we call an incarnational ministry, that they are living through the times in which they are ministering. And if you think that the prophets of God understood all that God was doing and had some kind of super spiritual revelations and could just answer all the people's questions, no, they did not. And we see that. We see that tension between a prophet who knows God, who's involved in the worship of God, and who loves God, but who at the same time has questions for that same God. And that's why this book is so incredibly powerful and has meant so much to the saints, of so many generations. So again, the idea of he received, it's a vision that he saw. His own day. In verse 2, and here it is, the first words of the Psalms. How long, O Lord? Think of how many Psalms that contain that sort of language. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save. So again, you can see some of the Psalms here that contain some of these similar language, some of these same ideas. Psalm 13, Psalm 74, mean, the writer here, the prophet, has an intimate knowledge of these Psalms. Lord, how long must I cry out to you about this? You ever feel that way? Something going on in your life, a problem, a situation, you cry out to the Lord and He seems not to listen to you? Let me ask you this question. Is it true that when we cry out to God, sometimes God doesn't listen to us? He doesn't hear us? I mean, God always hears us, right? I mean, He always hears us. The question is, sometimes, we don't get an answer, from the Lord. God, will you just tell me what's going on? Will you just show me, why this is happening? This is the frustration. This is the burden that Habakkuk is feeling. Lord, how long do I have to call out to you? How many times? How many years? How long do I have to keep, petitioning you? But you do not listen. Or I cry out to you violent. Notice that word. I cry out to you violence, but you do not save. What does he mean here? What is he observing? He's observing the violence that is taking place in his own nation, by his own people. We have chronicled many of the social and religious sins that the people, in this time period had. First of all, the intense idolatry in the nation, the sacrificing, of the people's own children to these false gods, the violence. That's murder, folks. He's crying out, about the violence of taking, the land by the rich, using the twisting and misusing the debt slavery laws to gobble up the ancestral inheritance, the land that was given to each and every Israelite as their birthright. Remember, the land was divided to each tribe and each in each family, and then down to each individual. The land was their inheritance forever, and they were taking advantage of the debt slavery laws and confiscating the lands of the poor, and robbing them of their ability to support themselves, and selling them into slavery, indentured servanthood that we had in the Old Testament. And the prophet sees that as violence. We had the religious sins. How the prophets would give a prophecy for whoever was the highest bidder. And the prophecy would go around telling the rich and the powerful whatever they wanted to hear so they could justify their actions. Remember that? The lying prophets. The one who some of the prophets would say, if you prophesied a beer in every hand, that's the kind of prophet you folks would want. Remember that? We saw that language before. And so all of these things that Habakkuk sees going on in his nation, all of the injustice, all of the violence, all of this, these lies, and he's just so full of it. He says, how long do I have to cry out to you? But you do not deliver. You do not rescue. You don't do something about this. Isn't that our cry for our own nation? Lord, how long can we continue to abort this many babies? How long can we call evil good and good evil? How long can we, divide our people? How long, can we keep pushing? This gender issue and this homosexuality issue. How long? How long can we keep doing this? How long can we keep this up? Or how long until you do something about it? And the violence, boy, that's starting to be an issue in our own land, isn't it? In our cities. We cry out to you, violence, but you do not save. Boy, ripped from the headlines, prophet, huh? Pretty relevant. And so this is the burden, this is the frustration, this is what he's crying out for. And so then in verse 3, we have a little bit of a narrowing of the focus. And here we have a little bit more clarity given to us. Why do you make me look at injustice? And why do you tolerate nabat, wrongdoing? We have two words here. We have ra and we have nabat. Now, these two words, basically, they mean about the same thing. We have what we call a synonymous parallelism here between verse 1 and verse 2. Remember that parallelism, the rhyming of thoughts, is the key feature in Hebrew poetry. We rhyme words, they rhyme thoughts. So in a sense, ra'ah and nabat, these words work together. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you make me see wrongdoing? Okay, these are similar words. They mean the same thing. Okay? We're going to see these two words throughout the book. They're going to form a literary theme, so pay attention to them. Remember them right now. Nabat and ra, these two words. We're going to come back to them over and over again. God, why do you make me look at these things? I mean, every day we get up, there's another headline. Every time we turn on the news, there's another story. Each one more incredible than the one before. Each one a new low to which we sink. The injustice, that characterize what's happening in our country, the wrongdoing. Why, God, do you make me look upon this? Why do I have to see this day after day after day? Why is it literally in the face of me? Why do I have that continually coming to me? Why do I have to look at this injustice? Why do I have to see this wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict that abounds. And therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. You see, one of the things that God took very seriously, in His Word, is that the law was given so that justice would be upheld. The whole system of the Israelites demanded that the law be followed. Because when the people ignored the law, then it had a terrible effect, on the average person. You had people being taken advantage of. If the law wasn't being executed, if the law wasn't being enforced, if the law was ignored, then the law itself was paralyzed. It was without power to make a difference in the social structure of the Israelite society. When you have a breakdown of law, you have a breakdown of what's the word that always goes with law? Order. We're seeing that. We're seeing the seeds of that, the beginnings of that. That if you don't like something that happens, you can just go out and loot and burn and bust and break and steal and do whatever. And the response of those, in those places, of the governors, even from the highest office, just this past week, is no mention of criminals and upholding the law, but rather, let it go. Let it play itself out. Don't add to it. Don't make it worse. Now, we all know, folks, anybody with half a brain knows where that goes. That descends into madness and chaos and anarchy. When the law is paralyzed, then injustice and violence are the inevitable result. It is an unshakable law of the universe. No way around it. Because we all understand human nature. I think fundamentally that's the difference between the right and the left. I think fundamentally the difference is the view of human nature. Is man fallen, or is man basically good, but it's government or society or the church or Christians or this group or that group or whatever that just, hold a person down? No, it's his inherent sinfulness is the issue. And that's really a fundamental difference. And so this is what he's observing. All of this injustice and violence has come because the leaders in the nation, the princes of Israel, remember Zephaniah railed against them? The merchants, everybody in society, even the priestly class, they refused to obey the law. They refused to make the law known to the people. They refused to take the law and make it practical and enforce the law. And when that happened, all we saw was injustice abounded and violence was the rule of the day. The law is paralyzed. That's an incredible statement. He says the wicked hem in the righteous. They surround the righteous so that justice is, and here the word is a bone. It's really an interesting word. It's perverted. It's twisted. It's a thing that should be straight, but instead, it's become, all crooked. Like the spine of an old person. Hunched over and bent and twisted up, and that's sort of the way it goes. Some of you have those spines, don't you? Mercedes, you're working on one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Twisted up spine. Well, Caleb's got a twisted up nose, so.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, we got a crooked nose, so now
yeah.
We'll just keep working our way down.
By the way, pray for him. He's got surgery Tuesday to fix that beef. So, but yeah, that word, amazing, twisted, perverted, not what it should be, not what it was intended to be. God doesn't intend a society to descend into chaos. He's given clear laws and clear moral absolutes. And that really has to be the underpinning of any human law, because if any human law goes against God's law, inevitably it's not going to work. There's going to be trouble. There's going to be injustice. There's going to be violence. And ultimately death. Because if law is not based upon virtue, it's worthless. That's straight from the mouth of C.S. Lewis, who understood that. There's no point to it. So powerful language here. So in verse 5, you notice here that we have the first answer from God. Then, chapter 1, you mean in verse 5. So here it is. So let's sum up, you mean Habakkuk's questions. His first question is, God, our nation is descending into evil, chaos, injustice. No one's following the law. The law is being perverted. The wicked are hemming in the righteous. They're surrounding the righteous. And the very law itself is being perverted. God, why are you making me look on these things? Why won't you act? Are you asleep? What are you doing? What's going on? Here's God's answer, verse 5. Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. Now, do you see how, the Lord takes the words of Habakkuk's question, Lord, why do you make me look at evil? Why do you make me see, injustice? And the Lord turns right around to him, and amazingly the Lord answers. First of all, this is incredible alone that the Lord would answer his prophet. So don't miss that part. But God actually shows up and says, you want an answer to that question? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. Look at the nations. Watch and be utterly amazed. You want to know why I make you look at these things? Well, guess what? I got something for you to look at. Look at what I'm about to do. Look at what I'm about to do, because you ain't going to believe it, man. You ain't going to believe it. That's the translation here. It's exactly what God is doing. He's taking the words of the prophet and throwing them right back at him. You're wondering why I'm making you look at these things? Well, guess what? I got something for you to look at. You look at this. And when you look at this, you're not going to believe your eyes. I am going to do something about it. And you will be astounded. You will be utterly amazed when you see what I'm about to do. See how the play on words is there for Habakkuk? Uses the same words. Ra and Abad. Same words. Back to back. Synonymous. Parallelism. What's a synonym? It's the same word. It's the same idea, but a different word. Right? Same thing he's doing here. Synonymous, parallel. Look at and see. Same idea. Throws it right back at the prophet. I'll give you something to look at. Here. Want to see my answer? Look at this. He says, look at the nations and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something, and notice this, in your days. Okay? Now, some people will indicate that this is a time reference to say that it's going to happen during the lifetime, of Habakkuk, and so that's why a lot of people put it at the later stages of the later stages of this of the two choices that I gave you after the godly reign of Josiah and in the descent of those kings, and so that he would literally live through this time frame of these 3 waves. He would experience some of the 3 waves of the Babylonian invasion, and so that's one of the reasons for some folks giving it that later date. But either way, however you take it, we understand that very soon, something utterly amazing was going to take place. Something that you would not believe even if you were told. Something that shocking. So, when you go back to, about a year and about 3 or 4 months ago, could you have ever believed, that what would happen in our country with a simple little virus would actually take place? Who could have foreseen? Who could have imagined such a thing, taking place in the world? Nobody would have predicted that. These are the kind of things that God can do in a second, in a minute. He can change your entire world in a millisecond if he chooses to. Wow. He certainly did. About a year and a half ago, a little shy of that. But I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. This is the language of Isaiah. In chapter 29 and in verse 14, we read similar language to this. I'm not going to take the time to look at that today because we have a lot to get through. We have to keep moving. But here it's in the context of the Assyrian Empire, raising up the Assyrian Empire. And he says, look, you're going to be astounded. Even I'm going to take these people and I'm going to use them to do something about my own people. And so we can see this language being used. He borrows from the major prophets as well. And then we read this in verse 6, I am raising up the Babylonians. How many people have Chaldeans in your version of the Bible? Many of you do. They're the same people. But I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law unto themselves, and they promote their own honor. Now, this is what is going to be utterly amazing to the people of Israel. This is what nobody sees coming. That God is going to take the Babylonians, and He's going to raise them up, and they're going to come in, and they're going to bring judgment upon a wayward Israel. Okay? That's God's answer. God, why are you making me look at these things? God, why are you silent? God, why aren't you doing anything about the spiritual condition in our nation? Why aren't you doing anything about the violence and the injustice? And God says, look, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm raising up a people that will be a total shock to everyone. Now, why? Because at the time, and especially if you take the earlier date of the writing of Habakkuk, and this is an argument for the earlier date, if you take the earlier date of Habakkuk's writing during the reign of Manasseh, at that time, Assyria was still the big dog on the block, and the Babylonians were this, know-nothing, nation that was a vassal state of Assyria. No one would have thought that all of a sudden they would rise up, overthrow the Assyrians with the help, of the Medes, and that the most powerful nation in the world at the time, Assyria, would be brought to their knees, and that Babylon would emerge as a new world power, even defeating the Egyptians at Carchemish and sending them running with their tails back to their between their legs back to Thebes, right? I mean, it would have been amazing. No one would have imagined that. It's like saying that some small third world country in some distant part of the world would be raised up and suddenly would come and defeat the United States of America in a battle. That's how shocking this was to the ancient world. I'm going to do something that nobody sees coming. I'm going to shock the world. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans. And look what he calls them. A ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth. And they're going to, because they're going to come. Remember the Fertile Crescent? Remember the Fertile Crescent we talked so much about in Israel? You don't go straight across. You got to go from the north or the south to be able to get to the Holy Land because there's that big desert in between. Remember that? That's like the meat or the tuna fish inside the crescent. By the way, interesting story out this week. That a Subway tuna fish, they actually did a study on the tuna fish inside a Subway tuna fish sandwich and found that it contained no actual tuna DNA. Then what the heck is it? If I ain't eating tuna and it's got no tuna DNA, I'm like, man, that's frightening. I ain't ever eaten there again. Not that I did that much before, but and then, by the way, anybody eating tuna fish, that stuff's gross for the most part. Who goes and says, I want a tuna hoagie? Like, no ham, no salami, no capicciola or cappuccino. What's that stuff? Pepsi Cola, none of that. No smoked turkey breast. Yeah, give me a tuna hoagie. Anyway, sorry. If you like tuna, I apologize. I'm an equal opportunity offender. All right. But I'm gonna raise these people up. They're going to come, and this is going to be just absolutely amazing to folks. They're an impetuous people. They sweep across the whole earth. They seize dwellings not their own. They're going to come up through the Fertile Crescent. They're going to, city by city, systematically force the Assyrians back to that final and decisive battle. And then they're going to come down, into the Holy Land, and they're going to come in the first wave, and they're going to come into Israel, and under Nebuchadnezzar, they're going to take Daniel and the first round of exiles, all the Jewish nobility, and the vessels, the temple of God, and they're going to carry them back to Babylon. They're going to sweep across the whole earth, across the whole Fertile Crescent. Because remember, this is the whole earth to the people that are living here. They're a feared and dreaded people because they are going to be as bad as the Assyrians are by the time they get rolling. They're going to be as ruthless, as violent, and as indiscriminate in their killing as the Assyrians were. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law unto themselves. Boy, that phrase right there, that's ripped from the headlines too. That's what we are today. We're a law unto ourselves. Everybody does what's right in their own eyes, going way back to the period of Judges. That's where we're headed. And it says they promote their own honor, or they worship their own honor. They promote themselves. This is God's answer. This is who He is raising up. This was predicted in the blessings and cursings of Deuteronomy chapter 28, And starting in verse 49, I highly recommend you to read that passage of Scripture if you want to be absolutely frightened, because that is, you know what? Why don't we just take a look at it? Just because I want you to see exactly how serious God is about this. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 49. The Lord will bring a nation against you. Again, if you don't obey me, if you don't obey the law, this is what's going to happen. Remember, God said there's blessings and cursings. If you obey me, your nation is going to be the head of all the nations. It's going to be prosperous, successful. You're going to have everything you need. I'm going to cause you to be the light around the world. I'm going to use you in incredible ways. But if you don't, if you turn from me, if you paralyze the law and pervert justice and turn to violence and ignore the law, this is what's going to happen to you. Then the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand, a fierce-looking nation without respect for the old or pity for the young. They will devour the young of your livestock, the crops of your land, until you are destroyed. They will leave no grain, new wine or oil, nor any calves of your herds or lambs of your flocks, until you are ruined. They will lay siege to all the cities throughout your land until the high and fortified walls in which you trust fall down. And they will besiege all the cities throughout the land the Lord your God is giving you. And you can go on and read some of the things when you're there in some of these chapters, and it's just absolutely horrific, the description of what's going to happen. But God is serious. That these Babylonians are going to come, just as Deuteronomy predicted. If you turn away from my law, if you get so bad, you're worse than the Gentile nations, then I will do something about it. So God is saying, why are you seeing injustice? Why are you looking at evil? Well, take a look at this. Shock and awe. I'm going to bring up a ruthless people. They're going to come in, and they're going to deal with this problem. And it's not going to be pretty. Verse 8, their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour. They come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. Notice the paired words here, the literary style. You notice you have three animals listed there, the leopard, the wolf, and the eagle, all predators. You have the words for swifter, gallop, fly, swooping, a fast-moving desert wind, that, whatever they call that, sriracha wind. It's not sriracha, that's like some kind of seasoning. But so something wind, Sriracha? I don't know, something like that. Can't remember. But you get the idea, right? Holy Land is famous for that. But notice that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen fiercely and fast. Because out of nowhere comes the Babylonians, and all of a sudden they're pushing all the way up. They're pushing the big dogs on the block, back. They're destroying them, and they swoop right straight around. Pretty amazing. You don't want to run into a wolf, out in the wilderness. You don't want to run into a leopard out in the wilderness, and you really don't want your eyes pecked out by an eagle either. That's not fun. Right, Mom?
Good.
Mom's definitely afraid of birds getting in her hair. It's a childhood fear. That's right. We'll do some counseling later, Mom.
Good.
They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. Basically, they're gathering up. All of the prisoners, all of the conquered peoples, and they're sweeping them into a pile like you would sand inside your house in the Holy Land. Because that was a very real problem. Or if I've ever stayed down at the beach, sand just gets everywhere. You're constantly sweeping it into piles, right? So you can take it away. That's what they're doing. They're sweeping the prisoners. They're sweeping the bodies into piles. That's what the Babylonians were going to leave behind. The language is striking. Striking. Very, very, very powerful. He says they mock kings and scoff at rulers. I don't care who your king is. I don't care their fame. I don't care that whatever their legend goes before them. How many battles they fought, how many people they killed, how powerful they are. We don't care. They're no threat to us. They mock kings. They scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities because they build earthen ramps so they can capture them. Remember, that this has been happening in history now. It used to be that walled cities were safe, but now, with the modern siege implements that these folks like the Assyrians and the Babylonians have, they're able to build earthen ramps up to the walls of the city. Remember the siege of Lachish? We talked about that historical background before some of our other minor prophets. How they have the siege engines, those big, wheeled, carts with big frontal protections, and the warriors on there, with their shields, so that they couldn't, send the fiery arrows into the wood itself. So they had shields in the front, clad with metal, and they would march those things up to the gate and begin, battering down, the ramp, and use that to be able to connect ladders to get across to the ramparts, so they could attack the cities. Oh, you're there behind your wall? You think that's going to save you? We're the Babylonians. We laugh at walled cities. We laugh at kings. We mock them. We just build an earthen ramp and capture them. It's fine. We got all day. You don't. You're holed up in that city. You don't have a supply chain. All you have is what you have there inside the city, whatever you've kept. And it says, and then they sweep past like the wind as they go on. Guilty people whose strength is their God. That's what these folks did. Many of the Babylonians actually worshipped their weapons. Because it was by their weapons that they were able to conquer the world. They worshipped, their strength. Might makes what? Might makes right. That was the way the Babylonians lived. That was their understanding. And so we saw examples of this building of earthen ramps to destroy fortified walled cities. Of course, Jerusalem. Is their wall going to save them? Nope. Not ultimately. Now, when we come to verse 12, you will see again that we have a return now to the prophet Habakkuk. So question 1, Lord, why are you making me look at these horrible conditions inside our nation? Why aren't you doing anything about it? And then, the Lord shows up, miraculously, the Lord answers his question, I am. Look at this. I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. They're coming. And I'm going to use them. Now, if you thought that Habakkuk was confused, or that he was troubled, or that he was burdened with the problem that was happening with his own nation, can you imagine how this answer must have fallen upon him? Oh, that's great, Lord. Oh, okay, problem solved now. Cool. I was glad you answered me. Thanks a lot for that. We're going to be destroyed. Thank you. That is awesome. Not really the answer Habakkuk was looking for, right? What? What are you talking about? This is what you're going to do? But notice, that would be the way that I would have responded if God would have answered me in that way. Put it into your own context. How many of you have prayed, Lord, how long will you let this continue in our nation? God, why won't you do something about it? What if God's answer was, okay, I will. I'm going to raise up Swaziland to destroy America. Would you suddenly stop praying that? Oh, look, God, I was just kidding. That shore house, that house in the mountains that I have, I'm kind of partial to that. Can we find maybe another way? Can we, maybe work a negotiation, a compromise over here? Think about that. Think about this. And this guy lived this. Don't forget that. That he's living in the middle of this. They have an incarnational ministry. He's not detached from the circumstances. He has friends, family, and loved ones in Israel. His home is there. Everything he owns is there. And rather than this major flip out like I would do, God, are you crazy? So the first thing is, God, you're asleep. And the second challenge is, God, you're crazy. That's what I would have done. But look at the language. First idea, Lord. What's the word here? What's the name of God here? Who can tell me? Somebody look it up. What is it? Yahweh? Yeah? What's the name Yahweh? What is it? What does it mean?
I am that I am.
Yeah. And also, this is the covenant name of God, right? Covenant name of God. The God that had made the covenants with Israel. Lord. Covenant-keeping God. Lord. Are you not from everlasting? Is that true? Is God from everlasting? He's eternal. God had no beginning and no end. Lord, are you not, Yahweh, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die. Now, some versions have, you will not die. I think better translation is, we will not die. Why does he say that? We will not die. Does he know that he will live through the Babylonian invasion? Does he know that for sure? Yes or no? No, he doesn't know that. But what does he know?
The very covenant.
He knows that God had made a promise to Abraham, that God had made a promise to David. Sorry, I'm probably going to stay focused here a little bit better on where I'm standing. Apologize, folks at home. Anyway, so he's the covenant-keeping God. God knows that he has promised that he will not abandon his people. Now, does that mean that his people won't go through times of chastisement? Yes, but he understands that God will always preserve a righteous remnant. He will always do that. He's done that through history. That's one of the most amazing miracles that the world has ever seen, that Israel still exists today. That you still have Israelites on the earth today is an amazing miracle. That they haven't been wiped out in history or completely assimilated. That's one of the greatest miracles of history. That God has been faithful to his promises. And so Habakkuk knows this. He knows that when the Chaldeans come in, that there's going to be trouble, that lots of people are going to die, but he knows this, that God will not allow the nation, his own people, to be completely destroyed. Boy, I wish our covenant amillennial friends today knew that. I wish they knew what the prophet knew. Because he knew that. We will not die. You will preserve your remnant. He had confidence in that. And even though this message is extremely difficult for him, we have brought that out very clearly this morning. But yet, it's a confession of trust in the face of a very difficult message. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, covenant-keeping God, we will not die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. He understood that. God, I know that the Babylonians are not simply doing this by their own, will, but Lord, you're using them. Remember that Nebuchadnezzar, is called, a tool in God's hand. That he's called my servant, by the major prophets. That God is using these Babylonians and their ambition and their warlike tendencies to bring discipline and chastisement upon his own nation because of how wicked the nation had become, because they had abandoned the law, because they had turned their back on the covenant that God had made with them and the covenant that they had made with God. Oh Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock. Notice the personal side of all this. My, the constant use of my. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. And now look at what we have here again. Check this out. Look at how wonderful this is, guys. Your eyes are too pure to look upon evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. What do we have here? The word ra and the word nabat again, a third time. So follow the thoughts, right? Lord, why do you make me look on injustice? Why do you make me see evil? Habakkuk, look, see what I'm about to do. I'm going to do something unbelievable, unheard of, inconceivable. And then he comes back and he says, Lord, your eyes are too pure to see evil. You cannot look at wrongdoing. He throws the words right back to God again. What we see here is that the prophet, although he had every right in his human flesh to flip out at the answer that God gave him, he doesn't do that. Does he still have questions? Yes, he does. We're going to get to those. But notice the attitude in which he approaches God. I have down here in the bullet point, we can ask God hard questions. There's nothing wrong in doing that. We are a people who have such little knowledge of what's really happening in the world and in our lives. We have the Bible to guide us, but we don't have even a fraction of a percentage of the wisdom of God. We are too often self-centered. We're too often interested in only what benefits me. We don't have a long-term approach. We don't even know half the time what is good for me. And if you have any sense of self-awareness, you'll know that's completely true. Half the time, the things I ask for, I'm glad God doesn't give them all to me. It probably wouldn't be good. But God does know that, and the prophet recognizes that. And when he asks the questions of God, he does it from a place of faith. We can see that in his response to God. God, here's who you are. I know who you are. You're the Holy One. God, you're the covenant-keeping God. You're the God who's from everlasting. You're my rock. Your eyes are too pure for evil. I know these things about you, God. I know who you are. I know who you are. Where we go wrong when we question God is when we allow the thought in our mind and in our heart that in some way God is not good. Or that in some way that God is treating me in an unfair way. When we question his character, that's when we cross the line. Great men and women of faith in the scriptures have asked questions of God. Two of them come to my mind that stand as a very powerful illustration. One of them is, at the birth, of John the Baptist. His father, you remember, when he's like, what is it, Zechariah? When he says, how can this be true? When he confronts the angel, how can this be true? Insinuating that God is lying to him, questioning the character of God. And what happens to him? Takes away his voice. Can't speak. Going to say dumb stuff, then here's your punishment. Say dumb stuff, get a stupid punishment. Right, here you go. And then you have Mary, who the angel tells her, you're going to give birth to Messiah, even though you're a virgin. And she says the same thing. How can this be? But she wants to know how God's going to work it out. They asked a similar question, but they asked it from two different places. One asked in unbelief, and the other asked in faith. See, that's the big difference. We can come to God and not understand what he's doing because, hey, sometimes the plans of God are mysterious. Sometimes we don't always understand what he's doing in a situation. But we must always trust that God knows what he's doing. God is not out of control in the United States of America today. God knows his plans for this nation. He knows his plans for every person in this nation. He knows his plans for you, and they will be accomplished. They may not be your plans. But remember, his are higher than yours. He has purposes that are beyond what you can comprehend. Things that are good for you, but you would never know. You could never conceive. You could never imagine if you did it your way. And so when Habakkuk asks me his questions, he does so from a position of faith. Knowing the character of God. Folks, when you don't understand what God is doing in his plan for your life, what do? You go back to what you know is true of God. I know he's faithful. I know he's a covenant-keeping God. I know he's my rock. I know he's from everlasting. I know he's a holy one. I know that he's in control. You don't have to know why every little thing in your life happens the way that it does. You will know it one day, but you don't have to know it now. Whoever does. Does anyone know completely all the plan? No, nobody knows that. That's the human condition. And sometimes God's ways are frustrating to us. Sometimes they're a heavy burden, like with Habakkuk. But God knows what he's doing. Never doubt his character. Don't ask questions from that place. Accusing his character. Profaning his character. Diminishing his character. That's where we cross the line into sin. I believe that's where Job crossed the line into sin. Now, some people will tell you, it's not my interpretation, some people say, no, Job never did anything wrong, in his conversation with God. Well, then why does he repent at the end of the book? He did so because he got into that ground questioning the character of God. And God says, what do you know? What do you know, human? You don't know anything. Get back in your lane, bro. It's okay to question God. It's okay to ask him hard questions, but we do so from a position of faith. Here's question 2. Here it is. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? That's a good question, isn't it? God, how are you going to take this people, this ruthless people, these people who are worse than us, worse idolaters than we are? How are you going to take them, bring them into our own land, the land where your temple sits? How are you going to allow this to happen? How is that right? Why do you tolerate this? How are you going to do this? How is this your plan? That's what he wants to know. That's his second question. He's wrestling. Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? He asks it in a very respectful way, doesn't he? He doesn't hold back to ask God the tough questions. His question is summed up like this: shouldn't the agent of God's judgment reflect God's purity? And the Babylonians don't seem to fit that bill. These people are worse than us. Which, by the way, might have been debatable with how bad things were under Manasseh, for certain. And so in essence, he's saying the cure is worse than the disease. You heard that before, right? Famously from President Trump. Did you find yourself saying that during the pandemic? God, why don't you do something about America? And all of a sudden this terrible thing, comes upon us, and we're like, all right, God, why are you doing that? Amazing how fickle we are, how we go back and forth. When God does do something to get people's attention, then God, get us out of this. Wait a minute, I thought you asked for this. Interesting. So many cool thoughts to go along with this. Isaiah 47, 6 for additional study. If you want to look that up, you can jot that reference down. Verse 14, you have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls up all of them with hooks. He catches them in his net and gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. All of the images here lead to fishing. This is what the Babylonians are going to do. They're going to come in, and they're going to they're going to catch people in their nets. 3 ways that you did fishing in the ancient world. You did it with hooks, sort of like we do today. You did it with nets. That hung, or cast into the water. And then they would, be weighted. They would fall down, and you would pull them, up with a rope and catch whatever was in the net. And then they also did drag nettings, where you would move the net, through the water, and be able to catch fish. And so that's exactly what the Babylonians are going to do. And the Israelites are going to be like the fish that are caught in the sea. The Babylonians are the wicked foe that pulls them up with hooks, catch them nets and in drag nets, and so he rejoices and is glad. The Babylonians are going to rejoice when they come and they destroy Israel and they take all the plunder and destroy the city, and capture all the people, and they're going to rejoice because their gods were greater than the Israelite gods and all that nonsense. And the real problem here is the indiscriminate nature of the judgment in the mind of Habakkuk. Because when you do drag netting, you get that beautiful, fish that it's a great, fish to be able to eat, the carp. Are there any fishermen out there? Huh? Mom, you never had a nice juicy carp? Season them things right, they're goody. You get the carp, with all the other, with all the good fish. It's indiscriminate. The righteous and the wicked are both going to be caught in the same what? In the same net. As it's dragged along. God, what about us in the nation that care about the spiritual condition, that have obeyed the law, that have lived to be a godly life? How are we going to get caught up in that same net? How is that just? Lord, what are you doing? That's his question here. That's why it's difficult for him to comprehend that God's going to raise up the Babylonians. He's wrestling with this, right? Verse 16, therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying the nations without mercy? See that? Is he to keep emptying his net and destroying the nations without mercy? God, why do the righteous suffer along with the wicked? Why do the righteous get what the wicked deserve and the wicked get what the righteous deserve? It's been a question of the saints throughout all history, right? And one that when we look at honestly, we see and we observe the human condition and what we go through in a world that is Hebel, from Ecclesiastes, if you remember my study there. How do we deal with that? It's difficult. The saints of all ages have wrestled with it. But here's what we know. We know who God is. We know his ways are perfect. And we know that in the end of all time, he sets all things right. And so what do the righteous do? What did the other prophets tell the righteous to do? Wait on the Lord. Wait on the Lord. Trust him. God makes all things right. And one day, Paul says, I will know what? Fully, even as I am fully known. In the same way that God knows everything about me, I will know exactly what he was doing. And all that will do is result in more praise and honor and glory going to God, because for the first time we're going to understand his ways at a level which we were never capable of before we were glorified. And that day is one that I can't wait for. Thank you for coming this morning.